What's going on to all my Raised by Wolves fans out there, and welcome back to my channel, Movie Files. Elliot back again, breaking down the latest episode of HBO Max's Season 2 of Raised by Wolves. We're talking Episode 6, titled The Tree. A very great episode. I mean, we get the standoff between mother and grandmother. We see what happens with Tempest in giving birth and a new creature that we'll talk about, what coming from the depths of that acid sea. And Sue, or should I say Mary, has become something else. We're breaking it all down here in this spoiler review, but before we do so, make sure you're checking me out on all my other social media accounts. If you're new to the channel, we recently crossed 20,000 subscribers, and I love this community so much, and I want you to be a part of it. So make sure you're subscribed and you're hitting that notification bell. As you all can see on the screen now, if you enjoyed this spoiler discussion of Raised by Wolves, episode 6 of season 2, we'll make sure to give this video a thumbs up, as well as share this video to all the Raised by Wolves fans you all know out there that love the show just as much as we do. But more importantly, once you've seen the episode, let me know your thoughts in the comments, your pros, your cons, favorite moments. What were some of the more deeper meanings you all took out of this episode? Because there were a lot of biblical undertones that we'll break down. But let's talk thoughts, theories, and predictions for the weeks ahead in the comments below. So before I break it all down and recap it, this is a fantastic episode. Yet again, this season is hitting on all cylinders for me. I might say this is almost as good as season 1, 6 episodes in. I mean, again, you all know how I felt about episode 5. The horror elements, all the stuff that we got there was fantastic, but this was a really great follow-up. Again, the biblical undertones that we'll break down, the tree, the botanical box, everything going on with mother and grandmother. Can we trust her? Is she safe? I mean, there's just so much goodness to break down. I really enjoyed it. I really would say I loved it. Not as much as last week, but it's a great follow-up to have for last week's episode. But again, I want to know your thoughts in the comments below. Let's break it all down as we open the episode with Sue, who's hearing the same voices that she believes is Saul from last week. She enters a relic holding, shuts down the androids that's there, and she takes the botanical box, which is pretty key in this episode. I can't wait to break down that scene with you all. But moving on, we see Father, Holly, Marcus, and Lucius, as Lucius assures Marcus he will get what he deserves sooner rather than later, but he also finds a very important relic that has a warning that we'll talk about a little bit later. Time for Campion to be the leader that Mother wants him to be, as Mother has him speak amongst the people, and he tries to attempt to tell a joke like I did last week, my interface joke, which I think was pretty funny, but he tries to tell a joke. It doesn't work, but again, it's important to note this is the path that Mother wants him to go on, and he's kind of being reluctant to doing so. Compare that contrast to the relationship between Paul, Sue, and Marcus that we'll talk a little bit about later. And will Campion be that leader that Mother wants to be? Only time will tell. As we move on, meanwhile, Hunter and Tempest, we see him building his own android because he's prepared to leave and be on his own. Tempest learns that the baby is coming a lot sooner than anticipated, and this might actually speak to my interface joke last week with the grandmother, as we'll talk about a little bit later. Maybe grandmother was warning her that the baby is coming sooner. She could have maybe prepared herself to be this mother, which we'll talk about that scene a little bit later. But do you all think that grandmother was trying to tell her that the baby was coming earlier last week? Let's talk about that. Time for Marcus to face his crimes. Mother tells Marcus that she is in control now and the trust no longer exists, and she wants him to tell the children, denounce Saul, tell them you had no powers, and I'll let you free. And we see Marcus, he's starting to play ball and tell them, yes, I don't have powers, but what I do have with this robot Lax is faith. And they decide to take him away. The promise that we know Father gave Lucius seems so far to not be kept, because we're seeing that Mother's in control. And Lucius, you're not going to get your hands on Marcus anytime soon. As we move on, time to be that leader. After talking to Paul about Marcus and their belief in Saul, we see that Campion kind of takes his advice and approaches Mother and says, Mother, I think it's a better idea if we let Marcus free, because if we hold him captive, it gives him more power. It makes him seem like he's in control. And we see Mother like, okay, I see that leadership kind of building in you, Campion, but it only falls on deaf ears, because we know that Mother's not going to take advice from Campion, especially when it comes to Marcus. As we see, classic move by Campion. If you can't say yes to Mother, well, let me go ahead and talk to Father, as he goes into his lab, and we hear Father tell him how much it is a bad idea to let Marcus go. Did you seem to forget, Campion, all the bad stuff he's done to me and your mother? As we see this conversation take taking place, we see the android starts to open up his hand as a gesture to touch Campion as he decides to do so, and it's at this point that it communicates in an ancient Mithraic, and it is now activated. And if you all remember from our review a couple weeks ago, I had said that that being that Campion stumbled upon, that wasn't Saul, that was at the point where I was just calling her the ancient android, but now she has a name, and it is confirmed that that being was not Saul, it was actually grandmother, as we see that this is the name that Campion has coined to her. So I wonder if we're going to start to see this once belief in Saul by Campion, is it going to instantly kind of go away? Because this show is all about, it seems like every episode we have people that aren't believers somehow become believers, and people that were believers not become believers. So it's interesting to kind of see that dynamic throughout this season so far. And it's at this moment that we get the moment that I've been waiting for, as we see grandmother is, again, she's activated, and in comes mother. Immediately she feels threatened and puts her eyes in, and we get this really great standoff between these two powerful androids in their most powerful form. As father yells for mother to stop because she's hurting her, she ultimately takes her and shuts her down and puts her in a sleep mode, and she starts to realize, wait, we have very similar builds, which makes me wonder, is grandmother one of the first necromancers? Is this like the first one? Is it, can we say, I guess one might say that grandmother might be the mother of mother? I don't know. Let's talk about that in the comments. As we move on, Campion and father attempt to tell mother how they can use this to their benefit to the people, as father relays what grandmother had said to them. Why aren't you wearing your veil? Which is a conversation they have a little bit later. Again, seeing grandmother versus mother, that's going to be a standoff that I cannot wait to say, because as I mentioned, this was many weeks ago, I wonder will we get to scene where father, because we're going to talk about the conversation he has with grandmother, father's going to use grandmother against mother, and when we get that battle, it's going to be like Super Saiyan, and I can't wait to see that happen. Let me know if you all are expecting that to happen sooner rather than later. Mother thinks that maybe grandmother can explain the ancient civilization, their connection to Earth, and even the signal that impregnated her with number 7. The question at hand, is this creature, or I should say android, is it good or is it here to harm? Guess we'll find out in a little bit. As we move on, Marcus in the torture chamber, Sue pays him a visit. She tells him about what happened to Paul and how she's able to communicate with Saul. She goes more into depth as she is a believer now and a believer in Saul, but he must be on this planet. The scriptures were built here. She apologizes to him and tells him the plan, that they are going to the tree, and now this is their quest, and we're going to get a family reunion here in a little bit. Mother and father look into grandmother. They discover that grandmother is almost identical to the build that mother has. She doesn't have a weapon mechanism inside of her, but something more mysterious. I wonder, is it creation of life, maybe itself? It's very interesting that we didn't learn what was so different about her, as we know that she considers mother to be a weapon. Can she create life? Did she create some of these creatures that we see on the tropical zone? Makes me wonder. But as we move on, the serpent is screaming as Sue and Paul are attempting to open the botanical box. And while this is happening, we see that the serpent is somewhat triggered by them opening up this box. I wonder if the serpent knew that what this kind of living organism that we'll talk about that absorbs Sue, if it knew its connection and its ties to the trees, and does this all tie into the tropical zone is my question. As we move on, mother yells at the serpent for hurting Campion and immediately apologizes to the serpent. And I think it's in this moment that Campion realizes mother is more connected to that serpent than she's led on. I'm thinking Campion's going to eventually put the puzzles to the pieces. That's my brother, and that is your son, mother. It's only a matter of time that he discovers that out. Meanwhile, father and grandmother have a conversation. Now, grandmother is speaking directly to father and tells him that you're my partner. She seems very confused in this conversation. He tells her about the planet, and she begins to process all this information, and she immediately shuts down. So again, is she the original necromancer? What's the connection between grandmother and father? Were they once a thing? Will they? I think they will be a thing sooner rather than later. And father's going to cheat on mother with grandmother, which, as I said, might be her mother, which is kind of weird to say with these androids. But I think there's something there. Do we think that grandmother and father once knew each other. Let's talk about that in the comment section. Time for the family reunion. Reunited again, Marcus, Sue, and Paul. One all together, one big happy family, one big believer of family on their search for the tree. It is so important to think of these names as I think of Sue as Mary, for those that read the Bible, is the mother of Jesus, and we know that Paul might be the prophet himself, and we have Marcus, who is Joseph in this scenario. Very interesting kind of biblical undertones there. But meanwhile, Tempest all alone has escaped. She is clearly in pain because the baby is on its way to arrival. I immediately knew when she was on near the side of the acid water, I knew it was a matter of time before those sea creatures or that acid creature will be coming. We'll get to that here in a second. We see she's starting to give self-birth and the baby arrives. She immediately is very standoffish with the baby, and we kind of understand why. But as soon as she looks at the baby, she realizes it's not your fault. It's not your fault that you're here. I need to protect you. I need to be your mother. I need to save you. I need to keep you safe. And that's where I think it kind of clicked for her. But unfortunately, this bond does not last that long, because as this is happening, we're seeing this kind of tornado start to form underwater. We see that she's biting off the umbilical cord, and at this point, as I kind of thought was going to inevitably happen, we see the sea creature, but this creature is a much different design than the ones we've seen before, which makes me wonder, what is this kind of tornado-like formation? Is it another planet? Is it connecting to Kepler 22 in this kind of deformation or evolution of these creatures? That, like I said, that's a very different design, but neither here nor there. This scene broke my heart as it is now face to face with Tempest, with her child. It puts its hands on her. Obviously, we know it's coming from the acid waters, but very interesting. We see her skin starts to burn, but it grabs the baby, and the baby's safe somehow, some way. I don't know how the baby didn't just melt in its hands, but I guess maybe even a worser fate. It opens up its stomach again. This is where the horror stuff did kind of hit to me. I'm like, this is very scary. Can you imagine being a mother losing your child to a sea acid creature? It puts the baby inside of it and runs off. By this time, unfortunately, Hunter's late. He has his android there, but obviously Tempest is broken. She's heartbroken. She's lost. It's so interesting to see that dynamic, how she didn't want to have a child. She didn't even want to look at it, to how all of a sudden when she actually saw the eyes of the child, she immediately fell in love with it. But unfortunately, that love was cut short due to it being taken by this acid creature, which the question I have for you all, is the baby dead? Are we going to see the reunited, Tempest and her child? Get that in the future if it's alluding to the child dying. Let's talk about that in the comment section. As we move on, mother can't protect her own children at this point, as we know what just happened to Tempest's baby. At this point, Paul has escaped, and mother, I think it's pretty safe to say she's probably feeling, I can't even protect my own children. Mother overrides Sue's cube and learns that Sue is now a believer. As we cut to Lucius, shows mother the relic that Marcus had carried. She learns that this card is a warning. What exactly is this warning? Does it connect to what the serpent was afraid of? Does it connect to what's going on in this episode? Let's talk about your theories in the comment section. Now the botanical box has opened. As Sue sings to Paul, it is opening up. We see that there seems to be some type of a living organism that absorbs in her hand. We cut to Sue, who, again, talk about the horror, the kind of body horror, the transformation as this living organism is inside of her. We see she's digging, and she like howls at the moon or howls the sky, almost like a wolf, which reminds me of what she did last week when she came face to face with that acid creature. Remember that stance she had? It was very similar to her like being a wolf in herself, which I don't know what's foreshadowing to this moment here. But as we cut to the next scene, Paul awakes to finding the tree has risen, and he is looking for Sue at this point. We see Marcus walks up to the tree. He bites from the tree. He eats from the tree, and he starts to realize, wait, is this a living tree? He realizes that it's living. He kind of puts two and two together. This is not just a tree. This is Sue, or should I say Mary has now become this Sue, or this tree. As I mentioned earlier, Mary, Joseph, Marcus, I should say, Paul, prophet. We're talking some biblical undertones here that we got from for those that are familiar with the Bible. So it's very interesting to see Mary, who, if we're sticking by the Bible, gave birth to Jesus, but without having, sex, and was able to give birth to the prophet and Jesus. Very similar kind of situation here, but again, what are we going to see with this creation of the tree? What's the connection to these creatures coming from the water, as well as what is the warning that Mother was referring to with that card? And again, of course, will we get that standoff, the conversation between grandmother and Mother telling her that she was the original, she was one of the first ones, and will they be a conflict at hand? So much going on there. I love this episode. Again, the biblical undertones, the deeper meanings of, again, Tempest giving birth, ultimately losing her child, Sue, I should say, becoming this tree, the tree of life of the Sultans of Sten. A lot of good stuff here, and I'm really excited to see what episode 7 has for us. But hey, I enjoyed this episode. I want to know your thoughts, pros, cons, thoughts, theories, deeper meanings. What didn't you like about the episode? Let's talk about it all in the comments below. If you stuck around to this point in the review, I appreciate every single one of you all. Before you leave, make sure to like the video, share the video, subscribe to the channel, come and join the community. Of course, I again can't thank you all enough. And as you all can see on the screen now, hope you're having a safe day. Hope you're staying safe. Subscribe to the channel. Check out my other content. We'll catch you on the next one.